a tenno. That's a thank you.
In the Codex on your orbiter, you most likely have noticed that you have access to a museum within a datascape called the Leverian. This museum holds the stories of some of our beloved Warframes as well as some significant artifacts that were relevant to their individual stories. These stories are peculiar as they don't talk about the origins of these frames, they tell stories of their triumph and or struggle. Oftentimes more important than just the Warframe itself. But why am I talking about this seemingly unimportant piece of content? Because it may have some serious implications on the rest of the story with the recent update. Let's start with Drusus Leverian and Dante. Dante was the best friend of Drusus, both of them being avid historians, with Dante being far more aggressive in his pursuit of knowledge. The two had qualities that complemented each other. Dante had a thirst for knowledge whilst Drusus wanted to preserve and protect it, believing that all should have access to it, hence the creation of the Leverian. Dante was curious as a fault. Once the two discovered the mystery that is the Entrati laboratory, Drusus warned against it. Dante continued on to acquire more knowledge despite said warnings, even making friends with Lloyd in their travels. The two had contact throughout this, but Dante withheld that the void tongue he heard from the automatons in the laboratory, he now heard in his head. Most likely because Drusus wouldn't have allowed him to continue to face those horrors. Dante continues to face the mental onslaught of the indifference. Then he ends up finding a book, a grimoire, with knowledge that he shouldn't know or can't know. Knowledge from outside this reality that should not exist in this reality.
It may be said that a parasite is life from without the body, fighting to exist within the body, despite the body, even as it risks the body. What, then, do we call knowledge from beyond our reality, demanding to be let in? Poor Dante.
Drusus references a book that would not permit Dante's death as he gave up fighting the indifference. As Dante gives up, he is reshaped by these words into the Dante we now know. The most confusing part about this is when exactly did Dante become a Warframe? The reason I ask this is because we know Warframes are not cognitive things, and if that remains to be consistent with Dante, how was he making friends? Unless the Warframe Dante is only using the actual Dante as a concept. The conclusion that I've come to is that, based on Drusus and Lloyd describing Dante, he was always a Warframe. Sentient. Pursuing knowledge. No matter. Somewhere in that time we know that Drusus was glassed, turned into a Cephalon. Why? I theorize that he wouldn't be okay with being a Cephalon as you lose too much of yourself in the process, yet he seems content with his current state. Aside from the Leverian datascape going bankrupt due to a lack of visitors, even Lloyd's remarks toward Drusus hint at an unwilling participant of glassing, saying that he likely doesn't remember much about being alive. Drusus has a few regrets as a Cephalon though. Drusus wishes Dante told him what he had heard so he could have said he heard the same from another. Drusus also realizes how important profit is, and in order to maintain his beloved Leverian, he makes a deal with the same man. A deal with the Apostle of Profit, the founder of the Corpus, Parvos, Granum.
Day after day, we toiled. My father, my brother Claudius, pulling grains for the Orican takers in the city, as our kind had done for generations. We were young, but the work made us old. Our backs ached, our hands bled, the sun tortured our skin. In the worst times, it felt as though death would claim us before the day was through. It was on one such afternoon that I was fated to first hear that glorious sound. A whisper I strained to hear, in a tongue not of man, but of something else, something grander, a language I understood instinctively, the language of desire. It said, "Fear not poverty. Poverty is the bitter soil in which sweet desire blossoms." The city, those towers, I was struck with awe. What glorious totems of greed these Orokin had built. Built on our backs. Their wealth was my wealth. I was starved, while our masters were fat and full and warm. They flaunted their wealth, left it sitting there for the taking. Priceless gemstones decorating the tower gates. I was afraid, but the whisper gave me courage. Be envious, covet, then take what you desire. So that is what I did. Moving swiftly from sickbed to field, I fell to my knees beneath that relentless sun, my chest afire as it moved to my throat, robbing me of breath. Certain death had finally found me. I made one last heave. I spat it out. A molten red gemstone of the purest, clearest rubido. Swallowing that stone would have killed a man of weaker will, but not a man sustained by the power of desire. It was worth more than my family had made in 10 generations. It would fetch enough to feed us all for a lifetime. As I stared into its brilliant facets, a familiar voice rushed through me. Contentment is idleness. Desire inspires action. Nurture all desires. And so, with my brother and father pleading for my return, I once again left for the city.
Born into poverty under Orokin rule, Parvos Granum was a simple farmer struggling along with his people, mainly his brother Claudius and his father. I'd say that this was not farming at all, more akin to slavery, as they were subjected to completely inhumane conditions. Amidst his suffering that felt like it would go on until his death, he heard a voice calling to him. He says that it is easy for him to understand it, and it compelled him to desire more. With this newfound desire, Parvos set out to a rich Orokin city to take what he felt he was owed. Angered by the marvelous city encrusted in gems and jewels, all built on the backs of others. Built on the backs of his people. Out of anger, he approaches the city and hesitates, but the whisper pushes him to complete what he came for. He rips the gemstones from the walls boldly and, of course, is caught. The Orokin publicly humiliates him, taking away the gems he stole. The voice of desire comes back and pushes him to swallow a huge gem of rubido. Granum reaches for his satchel and his left hand is swiftly severed from his body, but he feels no pain. He goes back to his people and they ridicule him for his actions, but the rubido in his stomach forcefully finds its way out of his mouth. With this brilliant gemstone, Parvos could feed his people many times over. This did not satisfy him. He went back to the city to use the jewel to acquire a loan.
In desire, I was wealthy, but in strategy, I was empty-handed. I listened for the whisper. It said, "Money begets money." With my jewel as collateral, I secured a loan, and with that sum, I gave my own loans to poor men like me who desired more. With each loan, I dispensed truths I had learned from the Whisper. Those men went out into the world, and they too made loans, and their money too begat money. Word spread fast. Men flocked to hear me. I told them of the evils of contentment and idleness. I taught them the gift of desire. My gift to the future is an idea that wealth need not settle as a crust upon the upper echelons of the populace. No. Any poor grain farmer can, should he feed his desire and apply his wisdom, take fortune for himself. The more, the better. And when men of fortune come together under great leadership, their potential is exponential. Just as my money replaced what the Oregon took from me and made my body whole again, our collective desire will create a new body. A body forged of fortune and unencumbered by idleness or sentimentality. Ours is the grasping golden hand. We are desire. We are Corpus.
Parvos had no strategy to increase money, and this voice gave him the idea to use it to acquire more money. Loaning for the sake of profit, Parvos created a system of credit where he was the bank. His profit could be nearly infinite, considering the scale of the corpus. He would loan to people who would provide him profit as they loaned to others. The corpus knew wealth like no other. None but the Oregon could rival the corpus when it comes to money. Parvos was an amazing ruler. He also was not necessarily malicious, like the corpus now would lead you to believe. Parvos believed in working for what you desired. Like his story, he hated complacency and sentimentality. He believed those things would make the mind and body weak. Therefore, people who desired for more were favored by him. In my opinion, he could even be considered as fair. He later would create the board of directors only for his rule to be ended abruptly, his ship lost in a void translation. We now know this to be an attempt on his life, presumed to be successful. But Parvos is a genius, like that of Ballas, a dreamer, unlike that of the Tenno. His desire knows no bounds.
Seven for, 7 against. Cast and recast 7 times. So, it is decided. The fleet has been retrofitted and redeployed to begin at once. New lanes. Trawling for old things. By prophet and void, by the blessed handless founder, we hereby invoke the Deadlock Protocol.
He returns, with his own force of sisters and an entire pocket dimension named after himself, Granum Void. How he received access to this no one knows, but there is one entity that must have an inkling of what happened to him after the attempt on his life. After the Tenno seizes Protea from Granum, he manages to escape his timeless prison, interested in the Entradi's secrets. Drusus, now in a bind, fell prey to a deal, and we are all too familiar with deals.
The deal was shook. A little handshake, all it took. Though from the deal, the wee child ran.
Yet still, we end as we began.
Firstly, Parvos' interest in the Entrati artifacts alone is enough to craft a theory, though the existence of Granum Void and the voice heard in his past is a lot to consider. Granum was pushed by a voice of desire for a long time now. Whether or not this voice is just the inner muttering of a genius is up for debate. I'm here to argue that it is, in fact, the indifference, manipulating from behind the scenes. What does he want now? Maybe this very event. Maybe he is using Parvos to obtain some artifact from the Entrati. It's nothing new for him to be influencing decisions in the background, although this would mean that he was doing this far before the Tenno were even a thought. This scares me. Why? Because if we can only view this being as a concept or a parasite of knowledge to our own reality, then my theory about him in my previous video may be true. Time is but a measurement to him. The man in the wall is now and when, later and then, here and coming, contradictory yet precise. It's hard for something like this to be anything short of omnipotent in our reality, but with these implications on the lore, there may be something we are missing. Some rule that he must follow, something that we can use in our eventual clash with this being. To be honest, I don't even know if we will fight him, more of trying to understand him. Understanding him may prove to be more powerful than all the weapons we have put together. One might think it was awfully quick to insist that the man in the wall was the culprit motivating Parvos. But between the void tongue heard by Drusus and the numerous times Parvos almost gave up, I think my assumption to be fair. Anyone else would give up in his circumstances, let alone be given knowledge by a voice in their head. What we know now is that Granum is in fact up to something, and it has something to do with the Entrati laboratory. But, my fellow scribes, I'll leave that for another story. Peace.